Do I operate it from here? Ah, great. Ah, we're technologically advanced. Do you mean I'm the best Michael Otts? Which is interesting, because I thought I was the only Michael Otts in the world, and then I discovered that there's a history professor in Adelaide, Australia, who's also called Michael Otts. So my surname is from the Baltics, from Estonia. And so when my first book was published, I actually sent him a copy, and I said, as soon as we have the same name, here's a copy of my book. And we had an interesting email exchange afterwards, so maybe I should send him the latest one. Anyway, tomorrow we're going to be going out on our day trip to Philippi. It's going to be a wonderful day, as we've heard about, going to where the gospel first came to Europe. And so what we wanted to do, just at the end of this session, just for a few minutes, is to give you some, hopefully, meat to chew over on the long bus journey there and back as we discuss and we reflect together. And so what I want to do just for a few minutes is to reflect back about FEUER and where we've come from, and then look forward to the future and think about where we might be going in the future. And firstly, does anyone want to tell me where that is? Anyone know where that is? That is Schloss And that was the venue of the first ever FEUER conference in Schloss Can anyone remember how many years ago it was?
It was in 2008.
It was in 2008. And you can tell it's 2008 because looking at the pictures, we all look a lot younger. In fact, I'm not sure Lindsay even looked like that in 2008. So I think even then, he sent us an old photograph. But there you go. FEUER started 2008 in Schloss I remember it vividly because Nay and I and another delegate got lost on the way by accidentally forgetting to change trains and ending up in the wrong country just about. But it was a wonderful time, and some of you were there, and some of you have been on the journey ever since then. But what is FEUER? Of course, you know, don't you, that it stands for the Fellowship of Evangelists in the Universities of Europe. It's a slightly awkward acronym in that we had to borrow two letters from the final word. But it's in English, but it spells, of course, a German word, FEUER. So if we ever go to Germany for FEUER, we'll have to be careful at the airports when we're collecting delegates, not to shout FEUER too loud. But that's partly because it was started by an English speaker and a German speaker. And as we heard yesterday, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones talked about preaching being logic on fire. And so that is one of the reasons why our network is called FEUER. And what is it? Well, we've always said FEUER is a network of Europeans committed to the public communication of the gospel in the universities of Europe in partnership with IFE's national movements. And that is the specific focus. It's about the public proclamation of the gospel in universities. Now, we're not saying that there are not other ways to share the gospel. We've heard tonight about Seeker Bible studies. We've been thinking about personal evangelism, and they are wonderful. But our particular focus is the public proclamation of the gospel. And partly that's because we felt, certainly at the inception of the network, that that was one of the aspects of evangelism that had been neglected in Europe and needed to be rediscovered. And of course, it's focusing on the university, not because there are not other people to reach with the gospel in Europe. Of course, there are, but we feel that's a particularly strategic mission field in which the Lord has called us to work. And as Lindsay said yesterday, it works in partnership with IFE's movements. Some of us are general secretaries of IFE's movements. Some of us work for IFE's Europe. Some of us just work in happy partnership with them, working for churches and other organisations. And the feeling is that the need is so great, we need all hands on deck. We can't simply be partisan about it. If we're committed to this vision, that's what we're about. And the distinctives of the network, as we've talked about over the years, working in teams with local student groups, and we've heard examples of teams just tonight and the value of that. Focusing on public communication in three ways: proclamation, apologetic lectures, dialogue and debate, and we've heard examples of those over the course of the last 24 hours. Focusing on key universities, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Happening in conjunction with personal evangelism and small groups, which is why we want to work in connection with the Seeker Bible Study Network. It's why we feel these things work in happy partnership together. And we want to encourage a creative approach. So as Lindsay said yesterday, creative elements to proclamation don't supplant, but they supplement the proclaimed, the preached word. So drama, testimony, music, film, and so on in all of that. And what was the vision as we look toward 2020? And by the way, when we were looking forward to 2020, no one anticipated what 2020 was going to be like, did they? Sounded such a nice idea, 2020. It was great in January, got married, went downhill in March. But what was the vision? The vision was develop, no, not the marriage, the global pandemic. What was the vision? Twofold: the development of a network of at least 60 university evangelists by last year, with at least one in every country, and at least one mission week, events week in every country by 2020. And how do we do in that regard? Well, actually, we're more than 60 as a network, which is wonderful. Praise God for the people that have been raised up. Lindsay often says that a similar attempt was made a couple of decades before, which didn't get off the ground. So we praise God for those that he's raised up, a number of us here, but more than those who are here. We can think of many friends as well around Europe that have really caught this vision and are actively involved in that. And actually, more than perhaps we expected with the inception of national training networks and regional training networks to train younger evangelists, which is fantastic. But we don't yet have someone from every country, so there is still a challenge there, isn't there? Some countries have really developed, others not yet. And at least one mission week in every country. Well, by 2019, over 200 mission weeks had taken place in that year, and we reckon that 34 countries across Europe have tried at least one mission week, which is again wonderful, isn't it, when you think back to where things were in 2008. Think about how many countries were running mission weeks then, and the increase that we've seen across Europe. So praise God for that. And yet still not every country has done a mission week, so there's still some work to be done. So moving forward then, what are the challenges for the future of FEUER? What do we want to look forward to the future and consider? I consider there are three challenges that face us as we face Europe and the task of public evangelism. The first is this: relaunching in-person public evangelism after the pandemic. It's not a challenge we envisaged that we'd be facing, of course, 2 years ago, but it is the situation that we find ourselves in now. Even the countries that have a whole history of doing public evangelism, countries like Germany and the UK and so on, for decades, are facing the challenge of now the fact is that most of the students on campus have no living memory of what an in-person public mission week looks like. We do, but they don't. And that is the challenge, isn't it, of student ministry. Memories are short, and within 2 or 3 years, memories can be lost. So because of the break that we've been in, it's going to be a challenge, isn't it, to restart and to regain confidence and good practice in mission weeks. And that's probably going to take more than a year, isn't it, as we think about how we can then relaunch, even in the strongest countries where missions have been happening. That's going to be a challenge. Secondly, we mentioned it already, the challenge of pioneering public evangelism in countries that haven't yet or aren't currently doing it. So the vision was that we'd love to see every country in Europe attempting at least one mission week. And there are still some countries that haven't done that. And there are some countries that have tried it once, haven't necessarily had the most positive experience first time round for a variety of reasons, and then because of that negative experience haven't tried it again yet. And so that's another challenge, isn't it? How do we help groups who aren't unaware of FEUER, but for whatever reason feel that public evangelism isn't something that can work in their particular context? And then thirdly, how do we identify and train another generation of evangelists? As we saw from the photograph a few minutes ago, all of us are looking a little bit older than we were, those who were here in 2008. And it's wonderful that we can still be part of this, but there would be a danger, wouldn't there, that as this happy family we become rather insular, and in 10 years' time we're the same basic core group of people, and we've just got another 10 years older. And so the continual challenge of a network like this is how can we identify, draw in, train up, and then release younger evangelists. So those, I think, are the three challenges. And here are three potential ways of meeting those challenges. But if you've got other thoughts on this, we'd love to hear them over the course of the weekend. How do we relaunch in-person public evangelism after a pandemic? I think the Dutch actually gave us a little insight into this yesterday in their reports. Sometimes less is more, and sometimes we have to simplify to move forward. Many of our countries have been doing many mission weeks, and that's been great, hasn't it, to see how mission weeks have grown and expanded. But in the light of the pandemic and the challenges that we've faced, it may not be possible to do as many mission weeks this year as we have done in previous years. Some of our student groups don't even exist where they were before, and they need to be restarted. Some of them are really small and struggling. So instead of trying to simply go back to doing exactly what we were doing 2 years ago, maybe what we need to do is restart with a smaller number of missions in some key cities that can then provide a great model to regrow the concepts in our countries and our movements. And that's a model that can work really well. So a few years ago in Wales, I had the joy of speaking at one of the first mission weeks in Cardiff that had been done really as a flagship model. Missions had kind of grown, they were still being done, but it deteriorated in quality. And so the model of the team there was to basically do one mission that year that was going to be really, really good. They brought all of the staff team, they got as much help as possible, and put a lot of effort into doing one excellent mission. And then they invited student leaders from all the other student groups across the country to come and see at least one day of that mission week. What they wanted to do was to give them a visual model of what could be possible, and seeing a really excellent model meant that all of them then went home to their groups and thought, next year we could do something like that. So after a couple of years, that model of mission had then been replicated in other cities. So maybe that provides us with a model of what we need to think about in our countries. Is there one particular city, one particular group that we could focus on over the next year and say, we can't do everything, but can we really invest our resources in doing one thing really well, and then providing that as a model for other groups to be able to follow? That might be more beneficial in terms of the use of our efforts than running around trying to make missions happen in every city. I'm not saying discourage people from doing missions. If there are students wanting to do them, that is great. I would never say no, but if we're choosing where to focus our resources, that might be helpful. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the challenge of pioneering public evangelism in countries that haven't yet done them or aren't currently doing them. Now, in one sense, a continuation of what we've been doing for the last 13 years is what I would suggest is a great way to continue, and that is to continue to bring people to see good models of mission in other contexts. Now, in the inception of FEUER, that was very much people coming often to the UK to see mission weeks, and you're still very welcome to come to the UK, COVID regulations permitting, and seeing missions this year. But actually, one of the wonderful things is that the UK is no longer one of the few places that are doing really good mission weeks. We can see mission weeks happening all over Europe. And often it is more helpful to take people to see a similar cultural context to your own. So we've heard about how that has happened in the Balkans, with the Serbs coming down to Greece. We saw that with Russians going to Belarus to see missions and so on. And so getting people to see a model of mission. I just find again and again, it's amazing how powerful this is. You can talk, can't you, about the concepts of a mission week. You can come home from FEUER and you can share the stories. And people kind of get it. But then you bring people to see a mission week happening. You sit them in a meeting where they see non-Christians engaging with the gospel, where they see the gospel being proclaimed and defended publicly, and it just gives them so much confidence. Remember just a couple of years ago, a group of students coming over, and at the beginning of the week, they were really not sure whether they even wanted to do a mission week in their own country. And they'd been kind of cajoled by their staff worker to come to see it. By the end of the week, their excitement to go home and do something because they'd seen that it really works. And there's more likelihood of that happening if they can see there's a similar cultural context. So it's not just this is something that works in Britain or Germany. This is something that can work anywhere as long as it's translated into the local context. So the first thing is to bring people to see what's happening where it's working elsewhere. And then, of course, the second thing is to offer to go and help pioneer and start a mission week. Now, sometimes that's been one individual going to work with another movement, and that's fine. I've done lots of missions like that, and a number of you have done missions like that where you've been invited by another IFES movement to be the speaker. But actually what can be really helpful is not just where it's one individual, but a team of people working together to go and help get Mission Week started. This is particularly helpful where the local student group might be small numerically or weak in terms of confidence. They're not necessarily going to be the most active, inviting, flyering, and so on. If you can bring in a team that can actually carry the mission, then in a sense, no matter how discouraged and inactive the local student group are, you can probably make something happen. And that hopefully will encourage the locals to see that people will come. And we've seen some great models of that, where teams have gone from one country to another. It's also much more encouraging if you're the evangelist. So if I'm going on my own, it can be quite hard, particularly if the local context is tough. But if you're going together, you can encourage each other, you can work, and you can play to each other's gifts, particularly if you've got a variety of gifts. You've got an academic, you've got someone who's musical, you've got someone who's a preacher, you've got some folks who are really good at personal evangelism, inviting and so on. Working in teams, I think, is a really good way to move forwards. And one of the things I'd love us to think about is what kind of teams could we produce from a network like this, and think strategically about the next year, and say, rather than just offering to go yourself, could you team up with 3 or 4 other people in this room and offer to go together, which could be a great proposition. Always worth remembering, FEUER's got funds that can help that happen. So we can help make sure that people can travel to see missions and then to go and do missions. And there are also funds available to help groups do their first missions as well. So if the student group is thinking we can't afford it, then we can provide grants for that. And then thirdly, how do we identify and train the next generation of evangelists? And we've often put forward suggestions about how FEUER might develop, and sometimes we've said maybe we should only run the FEUER network every other year, and normally the pushback has always been, no, we definitely want to do FEUER every year because we love being together, and certainly after not being together last year, I think we've realised the joy and the benefit of being able to meet together and have the fellowship of that. But one suggestion, and it's still just a suggestion, we value your feedback on it, is that potentially what we would do would be this. Every second year, we will do a much larger FEUER conference that we can throw open to a big number of people. And that will obviously potentially include the Academics Network, the Seeker Bible Study Network, and younger folks from your country who are wanting to dip their toes, as it were, in the water of public evangelism and try it out. They may not continue, but they want to come and see it. And so we can be very generous in our invites to a conference like that. Even if folks have not necessarily been involved up till now, it's a way to test out that potential gifting and calling. And then on the second year, we would have potentially a smaller gathering, perhaps a little bit like what we're having here, where there's just a limited number from each country coming together, of folks who are maybe more experienced or core folks involved in the implementing of missions in their country. But what we'd also do on that second year would be to really encourage national or regional FEUER gatherings, which allow you to spread the network wider. And we've already heard about how some of those have happened. We've had the Nordic FEUER already happening this year. We've had 2 Balkan FEUERs in the past. So the idea being that in your region, you can invite more than potentially you could bring to a centralized whole European gathering. And you can give people the opportunity to try it out. And from that, people could then potentially say, actually, I'd like to stay part of this and come to the larger gathering the following year. So we would still have some kind of gathering each year. One year would be very big, the next year smaller, but in the alternate years, the opportunity to do something regional or national. Okay? That's basically where we're thinking of. So it's not a complete transformational change, but it is saying how can we respond to the 3 challenges that we have in front of us. The reason why we shared this tonight is we want to give you lots of opportunity to reflect on that and to chat about that over the course of the rest of the weekend. Before we finish, are there any questions, publicly though, about anything I've said so far, of clarification or comments on that? It might be helpful because if you've got a question, potentially someone else has got the same one. So, now normally if I'm doing an evangelistic Q&A, I say, if there are no questions, that means you're all in complete agreement with everything I've said. Which normally provokes someone to ask a question. No. That's okay. What we won't do now is just have discussion because it's late. But what we wanted to do was to kind of put that out now so that we can continue to reflect on that So if you've got ideas, thoughts about how we could meet any of these 3 challenges better, please let us know. If you think there's a challenge that I've missed in relation to public evangelism, please also tell me that as well. We're not limited to responding to only 3 if you think there's more, okay? But maybe what would be really helpful would be to pray. Is that okay, Zeph? You're leading. We've heard lots already tonight, but also we've thought about the future. So maybe just take some time to thank God for what we've heard, particularly about Serbia, but also more generally as we reflect on what God has done. And then as we think about the future, let's pray for wisdom that the Lord would lead us and direct us in the way that we should go. Okay?